Hello and welcome to Write On, the podcast from Final Draft. This is the show where we talk about all things screenwriting. I'm your host, Phil Galasso. Today we have an interview with writer-director John Carlo. His debut film, Feral State, follows a misfit gang of runaways and orphans who are taken in by a dark and charismatic father figure played by the great Ronnie Jean Blevins. Together, they wreak havoc throughout the swamps and trailer parks of Central Florida. John and I discuss the role the location played in shaping his story, how being an actor informs his writing, the importance of table reads, and more. Check it out. I'm here with writer-director John Carlo. John, thank you for taking the time to chat with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us about the film. For people who aren't aware yet, tell us about the new movie.
So the movie's called Feral State. It's like a really gritty, dark, swampy thriller set in Central Florida. The gist of it is, I like to say it's like a modern day Oliver Twist, where you have like this guy that takes in these orphans and runaways off the street, gives them a home, gives them, like a place to live and everything, but trains them to be criminals. And together they go out and wreak havoc.
So you mentioned, the setting of the movie, and obviously like the Southern fried crime film genre is its own thing. Can you talk about what attracted you to the genre and what you hoped to bring to it with the movie?
Yeah, I think the location was the starting point for everything. This movie came about in such a untraditional kind of way where the money was there first before there even was a script, and part of the stipulations was to shoot in a specific area in Florida. So I went down to meet the producers and kind of scope out the scene, and the story kind of grew organically out of what I was just seeing in the community.
Interesting. That must I imagine that is not typical for your writing process to have and then go to a location and say, okay, come up with a story.
It's the polar opposite, which was a great exercise. But it's like, whenever you're making a low budget indie, you're always looking for like, what do I have available? And so like, as a writer, I'm at this point in my career, I'm also writing as a producer. And so I'm like, oh, my friend has blank, or my mom has blank. And so with this movie, I was just driving around being, oh, wait, we have an orange Hummer? Cool. Put it in. Oh, there's a burnt out barn? Cool. Put it in. And so based on what we had available, that really influenced the story and like the structure of the script.
Interesting. I want to talk a minute about Ronnie Jean Blevins, who I've been a huge fan of his since Joe, the David Gordon Green, Nicolas Cage movie. Can you talk about his performance in the movie is fantastic, and talk about him a little bit.
So there is no movie without Ronnie Jean Blevins, first and foremost. Like I wrote the script before I ever met him, before he was even on my radar. And I was, I had really early like preliminary chats with producer friends of mine. And also while I was writing, I was watching all these like Southern fried like thriller movies. I watched Joe, and it was kind of like in my memory. And then I go to lunch with my friend Ian, who's an EP on the movie. And, I was like, what about this guy? And what about this guy? And Ian was like, have you heard of Ronnie Jean Blevins? And I'm like, who? He's like, oh, he was in that movie, Joe. And it popped into my head. I just watched the movie last night. Mm-hmm. And he, he jumps off the screen, like, like he's acting with Nicolas Cage. And like, all you remember is Ronnie Jean Blevins. Mm-hmm. I was like, oh my God, it's almost like I wrote the script for him, but I don't know him. And I was like, should I go through with agents and all this stuff, do the traditional route? But then it's such a small movie that they probably won't even give him the offer. So I literally just hit him up on Instagram and we started chatting, and I told him a little bit about the movie, and he was like, send it over. And then I sent it over and he read it. And the next day was like, I'm in. Like, I don't care, whatever, let's do this. Because he really resonated with the character. And, since then we've become such good friends. And he's such an underrated actor that I hope this is the vehicle for him that will launch him into like, a more mainstream kind of position.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, whenever he pops up on stuff, even we get a small role on True Detective a while back, and I remember thinking,
oh yeah,
love that guy.
So good.
So this was your first time directing, right?
It was, yeah.
So I know you said, you write as you're writing and you're producing kind of all at the same time. How does directing then, make sense there?
I never went to film school, so I don't have a framework for, like the directing or the writing or anything. I'm more of like a learn by doing person, get my hands dirty. And the first two films that I wrote, I was really blessed with a director, producer, Danny A, who really, not only allowed me to be on set, but encouraged me to be there with him every day, like sitting next to the monitor. And so I just watched and I learned. And, being an actor for so long, I already had on-set experience, but being on the other side of the camera is so different in terms of just like the technical stuff. Having that experience on the first two scripts that I wrote, just sitting and watching, and then writing this one with being a director in mind, I tried to minimize locations. I tried to kind of, work into the structure things that will save us time and money. But you never know because the environment, will do what it will. And it's like, so many crazy things happened on this movie that were the polar opposite of what I was hoping and what I was intending to save time and money. But, being my first experience, I just dove in and hope for the best.
That's all you can do. So, you're obviously someone who's interested in like the crime genres, that sort of stuff. What are there influences of filmmakers that you really admire that, you kind of look to? You mentioned you watched Joe in preparation for this.
Right. So many different types of influences. Blue Ruin was a huge influence for me in terms of like just a reference in terms of like the genre and the look and the feel. I love Another Earth, I Origins. A lot of these like Sundance indie directors were really like big influences for me.
Yeah, I can definitely see the similarity in that. Those are all kind of lower budget movies, but the filmmaking and the look of it gives it a much you wouldn't think it's so low budget because of the production values.
Well, that's kind of like the trick and what I've been learning. Try to extend that production value as much as humanly possible.
Yeah, and you mentioned you've been acting for a bit. When did you know you first wanted to be someone who was involved in storytelling and telling stories?
I think from a very early age as a child, I remember I would go and watch movies, and when I got home, I was like stuck in the character. And my older brother would be like, "What do you want to watch?" I'm like, "Man, if I watch Ninja Turtles, then I'm gonna have to be Michelangelo. But if I watch like Dick Tracy, then at least, And I was like always thinking like I would have to become the person or the character that I watched. But I didn't grow up in like a art family or an artistic or creative family. And so it never seemed real, never seemed like it was a possibility
Mhm.
until I went to university. I went to UC Davis and kind of sneakily started taking theater classes on the side without telling my dad, without telling anybody. That thing, that bug that they talk about, bit me. And then I was just hooked and there was no turning back.
So what were between then and where you are now, what were some of the practical steps you took to sort of build a career both as an actor and then ultimately as a writer, director, producer?
The first play I auditioned for was Six Characters in Search of an Author by Luigi Pirandello. And at the school that I was in Davis, they had this like artist in residence program where they would bring in pretty big time directors from overseas to direct one production. And this woman, she was a director of the Royal Shakespeare Theatre in London. And I auditioned. She was like, "That was the worst audition I've ever seen in my life," to me. But she was like, "There's something about you I like. So I'll give you this like non-speaking role in the background and you can just sweep the stage and that'll be your role." And then and then I was like hooked. And then I looked around and there was a summer training program at the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco, which wasn't far from Davis. And so I got into that program in the summer between like I think junior and senior year of college. And then it was like this, 7 days a week, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., super intensive like theater program. And then when I came back, I was like, I knew what to do. I knew the technical aspect of the craft and then started booking all the lead roles in every play. And then thought I was like, the coolest shit in town. And I was like, I'm going to LA. I'm going to be a star. And then I, graduate, move to LA. And then it's like, oh, wait, there's a million other people who are trying to do the exact same thing I'm trying to do. And so then it was back to square one, auditioning, 1,000 auditions. And it was like, after like year 8, where I was still auditioning for cop number 2 or waiter number 3, I think I was like,
Mhm.
there's got to be a better way. What if I control the material? What if I learn how to write? Because if I'm the writer, I can write myself into these projects. And then so I remember I went to Sundance just as a fan to watch, and I think the movie that blew me away was I Origins. And then I looked did some research, like how do you get into Sundance? There was, the lab program.
Hmm.
And then so I was looking that up, and all you had to do was submit the first 10 pages of a script. So I sat down, I wrote 10 pages of a script, sent it in, and then didn't hear back for like 7 months. And then after 7 months, I get an email saying, "Congratulations, John. You're in the next round for the Sundance Screenwriters Lab. Please submit your full script in 10 days." And all I had was 10 pages. So I just sat down, locked myself in my apartment, didn't leave. It, wrote a whole script in 9 days. On the 10th day, had a table read, did some last minute edits, sent it in. And then I got into the next round and I was like, what the fuck is going on? This is crazy. And I didn't eventually get in, but I had a script done. And then once I had that script, a friend of mine had a meeting and mentioned that script to the guy he was meeting with, and he loved it and then hired me to write First We Take Brooklyn. And that's kind of how it all went down.
That's crazy. So, talk about the experience writing the first film that you got hired for. What was that like for you? Was it an idea you had, or was it something they gave you the outline of, and you kind of worked from there?
Yeah. So Danny A read that script that I wrote for the lab that didn't get in, and was like, "John, I read your script, loved it, but I'll never make this movie. Not my kind of thing. But I've always wanted to make an Israeli gangster movie." So he basically we sat down and he gave me like this really rough kind of outline of what he wanted. I took that framework and just kind of like figured out how to tell a coherent story.
What was that collaboration like? You kind of alluded to it earlier that you
Yeah.
just you had a lot more access than a writer typically does.
Right.
So that would just talk a little bit more about that collaboration, because it is not the norm.
I mean, ideally, I would have preferred to finish a full draft and then send it to him, then get notes, do a rewrite. But with him, it was like every 3 to 5 pages I would send in. He'd give me notes.
Mm-hmm.
And then so I go back and forth. And it was frustrating, but it was a great way to learn the process, because I had to think like 12 steps ahead in the 3 pages I was writing in the moment. Because even though, he didn't know where the story was going, I had to know and kind of plant those seeds in the script. And other than that, I would just read, at like hundreds and hundreds of screenplays that I love, of movies that I love, and kind of analyzed how they did it and tried to kind of, use it as a reference, as like a guide to screenwriting.
Mm-hmm. And then the next one was Mobtown, right? You worked with
Right.
Mobtown. What was that? Was it a similar process there? How did that work?
That was different because it was based on a true story. So I did a lot of research, and it was my first time kind of like writing about true events. And there was a lot of information out there, which was great, but that was a totally different experience because I was, forced to really kind of like do all this research and base these characters on real people. Some are still alive, some have passed. And that was a whole different experience. But I don't know if it was easier or harder, but it was very, very interesting and fun to do.
So what's your, obviously these examples are all very specific, even your with Feral State, the idea of like driving around Florida and kind of coming up with a story on the fly. What is your, typical writing process? Are you someone who outlines extensively? Do you set deadlines for yourself? How do you operate?
I'm a religious outliner. I think I can't, I couldn't even imagine just kind of writing a script free ball without bullet points. I've read every single screenplay book there is, every screenwriting book there is. I used to kind of like try and use Save the Cat structure. And then somewhere along the line, I kind of came up with my own version of all these different, I think like a beat sheet, basically. And so what I'll do is I'll create a beat sheet first, try and map out the whole movie as much as humanly possible. And then I'll also do character bios. So I can, look at them like visually, like I'll cast it with an image and give them a bio with the hope that not every character sounds like me. Try to, give the characters a different voice, a different cadence. And then I'll start the actual writing process, and I'll deviate from the beat sheet always, but it gives you like a map, just a little guide so you don't get lost.
And then, so when you're actually you got that beat sheet you're writing, are you waking
Yeah.
up early and knocking out pages? Are you, someone who just like spends three straight days on a draft, with no sleep? How do you work in that respect?
In the past, I've been like a sprinter, and a nocturnal sprinter, where like I'll start writing sometimes in the evening until very late or early in the morning, and then try to sleep it off the next day. And it became kind of like this habit. and I would convince myself like I can only write at night, and I could only do these like spurts of like 10, 15 page spurts or 20 pages at a time. And now I'm just realizing that that's just not a healthy way to live. It's not conducive to a healthy life and a social life. And so I'm trying to do the opposite, where I'm trying to, start early. Don't wait till the last minute before you have a deadline and cram. Write a couple pages during the day and then enjoy the evening, watch movies, get inspired. And then, there's that thing where I finish the day with a new idea, half formed, and then I'll kind of stop cold turkey. So the next day I'm excited and I know exactly where to pick it up.
So are you someone that how many drafts do you go through on a particular project on average?
I'm still figuring that out. I mean, with the first two, there were, I would say, maybe 10 different drafts. With Feral State, there just wasn't enough time. I wish I had more drafts. I had to really pay for that in post production because there were these holes in the script that would have, I think, hopefully been found in subsequent drafts. But because we were on such a short timeline, that I didn't get the opportunity. So moving forward, I'm trying really hard to do as many rewrites as possible because I think I haven't gotten to the point where there's some painters that like it's never finished. I haven't gotten there yet. I
Mhm.
still have many like more drafts in me before I'm like, okay, now it's seriously done.
Mhm.
But I would say at the minimum 10 or 15 drafts.
Are you, with your being an actor, and this is something I've talked to both writers who are also actors and writers who are purely writers. Are you someone that like speaks your lines out loud? Does that help your process? Do you need to hear things?
100%.
You do.
Yeah. My wife, she, if it was someone else, they think there was like a schizophrenic person because I'm reciting, I'm speaking, I'm acting out all the lines all the time. It's just how I kind of get like a gauge for the rhythm and the sound. But yeah, I'm playing each character in a
Mhm.
weird way. And it's just, I guess it's just kind of where the foundation is for me started in acting. So I kind of approach building characters in the same way, but it's
Mhm.
very strange and bizarre.
And when you're finished with something, or when you have a draft of something, who do you share it with? Do you have a like close, group of a handful of people who you feel comfortable sharing a work in progress with? And what are you hoping to get from them when you do that?
Yeah, I have a very small, very, very small. It's like two or three people at the moment that I trust. Some are in the industry and some are just not civilians, like normal people. Because I've learned that because I was always so eager for notes that I would send scripts to everyone, and everyone has an opinion. Everyone is thinking, how would I have done it? Like, what would I have done? How would I have written this script? And that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for someone who has like this looks at it objectively from like a movie standpoint or just like a story standpoint. And so I just like I would love to have maybe a few more close confidants that I hope to gain in the next coming years. But it's like, my wife, my really good friend Ian, and maybe one other person who I trust with notes and feedback because I don't take anything personally. And I
Mhm.
always say that out. I'm like, listen, I take nothing personally. I think being an actor for so long, you develop a thick skin for rejection. It's just like part of the deal. And so notes don't bother me. They never have. And I
Mhm.
appreciate them, but I want someone to be brutally honest. I want someone to really say, listen, this doesn't work. I don't understand. There's a huge hole here. I need that as a writer because I'm still learning. I'm still developing.
Yeah, and I think a lot of something that a lot of screenwriters bump up against is when they're getting notes, whether it's from a studio executive or just a close friend, is that sometimes it's the note behind the note. Like you mean the person may not be articulating what the issue is, but the fact that okay, it's not working for some reason, and you get to go in there and then kind of diagnose the problem yourself. I imagine
Right.
that's a big part of what you're talking about.
Absolutely. And I think that's where the table read comes in. I love doing table reads. Sometimes I'll bring like real actors in to do it. And then sometimes it'll just be a bunch of friends and wine. And it's interesting. You gain different things from those different crowds, especially with non actors who are just reading it out loud, because you can really tell if they're following along. And there'll be a point where they'll drop into the character without realizing they're not acting. They're just kind of like, they just fall into this is who they are, or they'll make it their own. That's like what you were saying, where I really have like a bird's eye view of the script, of the characters, of the story, is through table reads. So helpful.
That's cool. I mean, obviously, people do table reads. I haven't heard about doing it with non-actors before. That sounds
It's
like
a
a cool
really, yeah,
experience.
because there's no pressure. A lot of actors will act when they're reading the script and they'll get so into it. The movies that we write aren't just geared for industry people. The hope is that it's Mon Pon, Arkansas will love the movie too. And
Mhm.
so when you have civilians reading it out loud, you see really interesting things happen, and people either get it or they don't.
Mhm.
And it's been really helpful.
Yeah, it's like it's almost like a table read and like a test screening combined
Totally.
in one way.
Right. Yeah. And wine helps because people have a bit of anxiety about performing.
Loosens
And
them
so
up.
you loosen them up, get them liquored up a little bit, grease the wheels.
I love it. So obviously the last year has been challenging for everyone in all
Yeah.
sorts of ways. How have you managed to stay creatively productive? What is your experience? What was your experience over the course of this whole thing?
I mean, I think for me, COVID has been, it's destroyed so many lives. And so I don't take this lightly, but it's been very positive for me and very positive for Feral State because, we finished shooting the movie at the end of like the summer of 2019. And then it took a very long time to get the first cut. I wasn't happy with it. I had a little screening and it was just not the movie that I intended to make. So I had to basically go back to the drawing board, throughout that whole edit and started from scratch, and then realized, oh, we need pickup shots. Like there's a couple things that are like we desperately need to make this movie work. So we went back to Florida to do just like exteriors and, just like the shoe leather of the movie. And that was in like February of 2020. And as we're flying home, the world shut down. It's like that movie where the plane's taking off the runway and everything's
Yeah.
blowing up in the background and everything shut down, but we had everything in the can. We had all our footage. So it gave me this extra time to sit with the movie, sit with my editors and cut and recut without the pressure of like, we got it. There was no deadline.
Mhm.
And it gave us that space. But what it also did was it reversed like the supply and demand of the industry, where usually you have a ton of movies and only so many distributors. Whereas this case, there were no projects. Everyone was shut down. Everyone was on a holding pattern. So the distributors were like out there just trying to get as much content as humanly possible. And that really helped us because there was like a bidding war over this tiny little indie film that I made, which never would have happened, I think, in a normal economy, in a normal world where we get lost in the shuffle
Sure.
with, these thousands of movies every year.
Yeah.
And so for us, it was actually really beneficial. And I think one of the only reasons, we're coming out theatrically and on demand was because, COVID really shook up the industry a little bit.
There's a hunger for that content now.
Mhm.
Um, as a writer, have you been working on anything, or have you been purely focused on the post and now release of Feral State?
No, I just finished my next script. I've been really conscious of being ready for whatever is to come once this movie comes out. I have no idea. I have nothing really set in stone, but I've been, really drilling into my mind. Like at some point, someone's gonna shake your hand and say, "What do you got next?" And so I really wanted to have that next script finished. And
Mhm.
so I'm on like the third draft of it right now. Had one of these fun civilian drunken table reads like last week, which was awesome. It's another genre film. It's another kind of thriller horror movie, and we'll see what happens.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Just as we wrap up, is there something, you worn a lot of different hats over the course of your career so far? Is there something you learned along the way that you wish you knew when you were first starting out?
Yeah. Especially when it comes to writing, I think the biggest lesson I learned is like there's a lot of mystique and magic and this like magical quality that people think writers have and I got caught up in that. But it's really writing is like manual labor. It's like you're like jackhammering, you're drilling, you're digging, and you have to do it every day. Some days you're really productive. It's some days you can barely get half a page. I think the one thing that I've learned that I think is the most important lesson is you have to do the work. There is no easy way around. You can't just, you know, scribble something down and hope that it's good. You have to write and rewrite religiously until it's there. And that work ethic is something I don't think anyone really teaches you. You can learn beat sheets and structure and Robert McKee, and you can learn all like the, you know, that part of screenwriting, but if you don't have the work ethic, I think you'll never be able to finish a script.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of people out there with, 30, 40 pages of script
Oh,
and nothing past that. So that's, I think, very good advice to leave the folks with. When can people see the movie?
So Feral State comes out May 28th, on demand and theatrical. We don't have the cities or the theaters yet, but May 28th. Anywhere you can buy films, you'll be able to get it.
Thank you for taking the time to chat. I hope everybody checks out the movie in a theater if it's safe, if not on demand, and good luck with the next project.
Thanks, Phil. I appreciate it.
Thanks again to John Carlo for coming on the show. Feral State will be available on digital platforms and VOD on May 28th. Check it out. And as always, thanks to you, our listeners. If you liked this episode, leave us a review. And if you haven't already, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. For news about future episodes and more, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at Final Draft Inc. and Instagram at Final Draft Screenwriting. This episode was produced by Kayla Guess with help from associate producer Emma Vranich. Music by T. Kelly. Thanks again, everyone. Until next time, write on.